Alright, so again we have the first rule of the fundamental theorem of calculus. If some function g of x is equal to the integral from a to x of f of t dt, then g prime of x, the derivative of g of x, is equal to f of x. So this first part is just saying that if some function g of x is equal to the integral of another function, which is f of t, then the derivative of g of x, g prime of x, is equal to f of x. If you just imagine taking the derivative of each side, so you take the derivative of this side, g of x, derive that, you get the derivative of g of x, g prime of x. Over here, if you take the derivative of the integral of f of t, remember we said that derivatives and integrals are inverse operations. They cancel each other out. They undo each other. So when you take the derivative of this part goes away, and you're left with f of t, but instead of f of t, you use x as the independent variable. So you replace t with x because that's the upper bound. That's just how you do it. It's just a rule. So that what you get is g prime of x is equal to f of x. And like I said, you use x instead of a t because x is the upper bound of the integral. And it should match the independent variable of g of x, which is also x, and g prime of x. So if you're confused by the whole, you replace this with this, just think, okay, this has to match this, and then you'll be fine. So if you're still confused by the whole derivatives cancel out integrals thing, we can try something that may make a little more sense with math that you're already more familiar with. So let's say that derivatives are the same thing as multiplying something by 5. And let's say that integrals are the same as dividing something by 5. Now this isn't actually what it is, this is just, an example, something to make it a little easier to understand. So for this first part of the rule, we have g is equal to f over 5. We just took out the independent variables to make it a little easier to see. Since we're taking the integral of f, we're going to use that divided by 5 just to help us see it better. Now when we move down here, we multiply each side by 5 because we're taking the derivative of each side. So that cancels that out and we're left with 5g equals f. So we have the derivative, since times 5 is the same as a derivative. The derivative of g is equal to f, which is just what we have here. So if it helps, you can just think of this integral as dividing f by something and then multiplying both sides by that something to get this function by itself and this derivative here. And if this whole thing doesn't make sense to you, just don't even worry about it and just focus on, okay, derivatives cancel out integrals, this cancels, and we're left with the derivative of g of x equals f of x.